So, I was born and raised in South Central LA. Yeah, I don't know if you know about South Central LA, but um, it's pretty rough. It's a rough neighborhood. I don't even know if you're able to call it South Central LA anymore. It's been really gentrified by USC, but it was a really rough neighborhood. I grew up basically with a single father. My mom left before I was even able to sit up. I think I was about 9 months old. Unfortunately, my dad was a heroin addict when my mom left. I had an older brother, so he was about a year and a half older than me. So it was rough growing up. I went through a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have had to, and seen a lot of things I shouldn't have had to. And we lived in an impoverished neighborhood. Lived through a lot of poverty, and so because of that, there was sexual abuse from the age of 4 to 14 by several family members. Grew up in a very verbal, abusive home. I was at my babysitter's house. My babysitter happens to be my aunt. So my uncle was the abuser. I actually can remember a lot of things from being 4 years old. Even some few memories before then, because my childhood was very traumatic. And him being the abuser, my dad not being fully present, not being able to be fully present because of his addiction, also being a single parent, also being extremely young. So my parents were 21 when they had me, and I was already their second child. So by the time that my dad was 22, he was already a single father with 2 children. So because of that lack of presence, there was a lot of abuse that happened, like I said, for several family members. And it kind of just went on, and I believe partly of it was because it had happened so early on, so it had made me very timid and quiet as far as sharing that portion with anybody. So it kind of intimidates you and makes you feel shame and guilty that somehow it's your fault. And so you don't say anything to anybody. You don't want to get anybody in trouble. You don't want to get yourself in trouble. And so I didn't share any of that my whole life growing up. But unfortunately, due to that, there was a lot of things that that I got myself involved in because of that. And so continuing with this story, growing up, like I said, it was very hard. My dad became sober maybe about when I was about 10 years old. And it was really difficult growing up that way. I didn't realize at the time that I was being raised by an addicted parent. I knew that there was drugs around. I knew, the kind of neighborhood, but it's all that I knew. So I didn't know anything different. I didn't know any better. I absolutely loved school because it was my escape. It was my place of refuge. It was the place where I didn't have to think about anything, to where I could just be a kid. And I was extremely intelligent. So I had, my teachers flocked on me. I had one very specific teacher. She was my first grade teacher, and she kind of just noticed that I just was very intelligent. So she kind of just gravitated to me. She put me in some speech contests. She would check up on me. She would call me at home. She would make sure I had everything I needed. And she just kind of encouraged me to make education something that I really gravitated to. So that was great, and it was a wonderful start to something to where I didn't even realize that she was being kind of like my safe haven. She was kind of being that mother figure that I didn't have. And so growing up, that's kind of what I did. I kind of just focused on my education because I thought, wow, this is what I'm good at. This is what I can excel in. This feels great. And so I grew up that way until then I started following the same patterns of whatever I grew up with. So mom comes back in the picture till I was maybe 3 or 4, and I didn't know who she was. And I knew I wanted to be around this lady, but she was already pregnant and remarried, and there was a whole nother life happening that I wasn't able to be a part of. So dad got full custody of us. There was really seldom times where I would see my mom. And then the times that I did see her, there was a lot of abuse. So I did my best to try to stay away from her and that, because I didn't want to be involved. She was being abused by her husband. My brothers and sisters were being abused by their father. My mom would then abuse me because of the vicious cycle of abuse. And so it was just something I didn't want to be around. I just kind of gravitated to staying with my dad and his side of the family. I had my grandma that helped him raise us. So because it was such a bad neighborhood and my dad wanted to get sober, he knew he had to remove himself from there. So he moved us out of South Central LA, but he moved us into La Puente, which is pretty much the same thing in a different place. Still a very impoverished neighborhood. So my brother and I kind of just looked out for each other. My dad was always at work or busy, and my older brother was kind of like, I guess like my parent figure. He would look out for me. He would, we would walk to school together. He was always there. So he became like my dad, my best friend, my everything, right? My protector, my everything. And then I lost touch with that teacher because my dad moved us away. I lost touch with that teacher that was kind of like that mother role for me. So unfortunately, I fell into drugs about 10 years old. I started smoking weed at 10. That, just slowly progressed into other things that shouldn't. And so at that point, then I stopped kind of investing in my education as much. I knew I was extremely intelligent, but I didn't think I had to try because nobody noticed anyway. So what was the point of trying? The first time I used heavy drugs is probably maybe 12 years old. Let me put it to you like this. By the age of 14, I was a full-on alcoholic and a meth addict. So,
like a crystal meth?
Yes.
Okay.
But my drug of choice was acid. So I liked to drop LSD because it was just a completely different reality. I didn't have to feel. I didn't have to know. There was nothing around me that expressed reality. Mm-hmm. So it was the ultimate escape for me.
Yeah. When you were 12, the first time you used heavy drugs is what kind of drug?
Meth.
Meth.
Yes.
Do you remember what the feeling the first time you used?
Well, I only used a little bit, but it was enough to exhilarate me, keep me awake. It just felt like I was happy because I had so much energy. And yeah, that was, but I also knew that it was a very heavy drug. And because I knew how it had affected me growing up and the lack of presence from my father because he was a heroin addict, I never wanted to use heavy drugs. I kept telling myself every time that it came up, no, I'm not going to do that because if I become addicted, then that will be the end of me. If I become addicted, that'll be the end of me. And so it was easy for me to dibble and dabble into other things. Oh, if I just do it a little bit, it'll be okay. If I just do it a little bit, it'll be okay. Until it wasn't okay. Until I was fully addicted, and when I say a full-on alcoholic, I don't mean like I had to have a beer a day. I mean like a bottle of Bacardi. Like my boyfriend and I would go steal alcohol and we would literally drink like either like a whole 12, 24 pack or a whole bottle of hard alcohol. That's what I mean by full-on alcoholic. And so that just being a parent now shows me how my father's lack of presence was there. And I don't think it was anything malicious or intentional, but it was definitely a lack of parenting because me as a parent now would be like, how do you not notice something like that? How do you see your child be an alcoholic, be completely into the party scene and not realize what's going on? Like I said, I feel like my father just did the best that he could at the time that he knew. And he also grew up in an abusive home where his father was also an alcoholic. So to me, like I said, it's all we knew. It's what the family knew. At this point, it was a generational cycle. So that happened at the age of 16. My brother, whom I said was my best friend, my protector, my everything, he was murdered. He got stabbed, and it was a fight over a parking spot. And it was the absolute most traumatic thing for me that had ever happened. When I say traumatic, I don't mean just because it was shocking. I mean because at that point, I no longer wanted to live. Like, if I didn't have whom was my everything, I didn't want anything. And so I fell into a heavy depression, which led me even heavier into my addictions because I didn't want to live. Yet at the same time, there was this something inside of me, that false courage, right? That was like, if you take your life, then you're just taking the easy way out. You're not a weenie. You're not a coward. Like, you're not going to. So I truly believe that was hands God, his protection, because the plan and purpose that I have in my life, that was like, not yet. That's not what you're doing. Side note, simultaneously, my mom is, living her life. She has her husband. I have 5 other brothers and sisters that she ends up having with her husband, which I consider my full blood brothers and sisters. To me, there was no like, oh, you have a different dad, you have a this, or just my brothers and sisters. And so my mom was saved. She became heavily involved in the church, but because the abuse was still there, to me was like, if that's what a Christian is, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I want to be the furthest thing from that. And then I have this atheist father who's like, you could do whatever you want to do because that's all that there is to life. Just live it up. So it was easy for me to be reckless. It was easy for me to be in depression. It was easy for me to not care about anything or anyone. And through all that, I met whom my boyfriend was at the time, who's now my husband. And we just fell super heavy into our addiction together. And we were a part of a never sober crew, to where literally we were never sober. Like, that was the goal. It was like, you wake up, you got high on the way to school, you got high at school, you got high on your way home from school, you got high when you got home from school, you got high before you went to bed, and you did it all over again the next day. And that was my life for a while.
That was how old were you?
I was 17 at that time. At that time, obviously, my dad was heavy in his depression because he had lost his son, which I was completely oblivious to. I didn't realize how much it was truly affecting my dad and his marriage and everything, because I was so heavy into my addiction. And he got to a point to where he just couldn't handle it anymore. And he sent me off to go live to my mom's house. I went to go live at her house, and their family was such a mess. Mind you, I've never lived with her. I'm 17. I've never lived with my mother. I've never wanted to really have much to do with her. And I go live with her in a 3-bedroom apartment, an abusive home with now 6 children. And so it was just chaos. It was consistent chaos. There was always fighting going on in the house. And for me, it was like a living hell. And so my goal was to do whatever I could to get out of that house. But because I was so reckless and crazy, I come to find out when I started going to school out there. My mom lived out in the valley, far away from all of my friends and everything. And I think my dad thought that would separate me from the party scene. And I was at my mom's house living there for 1 month. And I had managed to already get kicked out of the 7th school that I was going to. So 7 high schools. Because I was so angry at the world. There was so much hurt. There was so much pain. There was so much negligence that I just fought anyone and anything, and I was consistently getting kicked out of school. I didn't care about my studies, so I wouldn't even go to class. I would go to school and I wouldn't go to class. So I was there for a month, and I managed to get kicked out of school. And when we went to our meeting, my mom showed up with me, and they let her know, well, actually, we can't let her return back to school because she's supposed to be a senior this year, and she has freshman credits. So I was 4 years behind. And when I realized that, I realized there was no way I was going to leave my mom's house. If I was not even going to be able to graduate high school, there was no way I was going to be able to get out of there and live on my own. And so there was just a fire that sprung up inside of me. I started going to a continuation school to where you can make up credits as quickly as you want, as hard as you work. And like I said, it was very intelligent. So I knew it was easy for me to learn, to do the work, to do what I had to do. But I was so far behind that I went to school throughout the day, and then I enrolled myself at night school, and I went to school day and night. And I actually graduated a month early. So that just showed me that if I was determined to do anything I wanted to do, I could do it. It was an opportunity for me to just leave my mom's house. In the process of all that, I got into a really big argument and fight with my mom to where I just figured there's no reason for me to stay here. I literally had just gotten my diploma in the mail maybe 3 days before that happened. So I was like, this is my way out. I got in the argument with my mom. It was this huge blowout. I just grabbed my stuff and I left. Unfortunately, my dad didn't let me come back to his house. I was pretty much on my own at this point. And that made it easy for me to become pregnant. And so I was pregnant with my first child at this point. I'm 18 years old. I'm like, what am I going to do? I have no idea what I'm going to do. And again, my boyfriend at the time and I were so heavy in our addiction that I even remember that I was coming down when I got the news of me being pregnant. And the only reason why I found out I was pregnant was because I was using so much. I was using so much, my body wasn't even functioning as a woman anymore. I was also using meth and LSD at the same time because meth was no longer doing it for me. So I would do it together simultaneously and I would get sick. And I didn't understand why I was getting sick, but it was because I was pregnant. And I remember coming down, but it was scary to me that I was getting sick every time I was getting high because that was my life. So I remember going to a clinic. I remember going to a free clinic and sitting in a chair almost exactly like this. I even remember what I was wearing, and I sat in that chair, and when they told me I was pregnant, oh my God, it was like my whole world. It was also my stomach, but my whole world just felt like it turned upside down, and I have never felt so much, I guess, regret in my life as that moment, because I realized that at that point I was 5 months pregnant. I had been using past my first trimester the entire time, and I was scared to death for the life of this child that was inside of me. And I was so far in my pregnancy that I was just worried, what had I done to this life? I didn't know what I was having. I didn't know what was happening. But at that moment, it just clicked to me. Everything I had been through my whole life, everything that my parents put me through, all the abuse, all the neglect, everything stemmed from addiction. And I did not want to do the same thing to my child. So from that day forward, I never touched meth again. And that was the end. That was like my saving grace. Like God knew I needed an angel to save my life. And so I became sober from meth at that point, but not other things. I didn't use throughout my pregnancy, but I remember praying every day when I found out I was pregnant. From that day forward, I remember praying every single day, Padre Celestial, because that means Heavenly Father in Spanish. And so I heard it so often that I was like, that's her name. So my eldest daughter's name is Celestial. It means heavenly. And she truly is. She's amazing. She's an amazing young woman of God. She's truly lived up to the name Celestial. It almost brings me to tears. She's so amazing because thinking of where we've come from to where she is now is truly amazing to see how God has just had his hand in everything. And so had her. And because of everything I grew up with, I wanted to make it my goal that my child would never have to see any of that. I'm not going to lie that when I did find out I was pregnant, I was thinking of aborting my child because I was 18 and I was scared and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I didn't at that point have family anymore. And I didn't have, I just didn't have any resources, didn't have anywhere to turn. I was scared for her, that I would be an awful parent, that I would just ruin her life, like my life was ruined, so why would I have my child? I went through that debate for about a month, and thank God for, his loving grace and convinced me to not abort my child. So we had her. I sobered up, and I was ready to change my life for my child, but my boyfriend at the time was not. we ended up having 2 more children because I was fighting for, I want to make sure that my children have a father. I want to make sure that they have everything that I didn't have, meaning not an addicted parent, meaning both of their parents together, meaning a stable home. I don't know how I thought that that was going to be a reality because we were the furthest thing from any of that. There was still an addicted father. There was still abuse. There was still, instability. I remember showing up to his high school graduation, pregnant out to here with our first child. He was actually the valedictorian, believe it or not, of his class. He was their speaker because he went to a continuation school also. So it was easy to do. We were both very intelligent. It was easy to do for him to become the valedictorian because you're at a continuation school. But I still remember it so vividly because I remember in part of his speech, he was thanking me for being there. And his heart was always willing to do the right thing, which is what kept me gravitated to him. But, like the word says, your spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That was basically it. And so I just kept holding on to this hope that this man was going to change. And for a little bit here and there, it did. And so we're 18 years old, and he gets his first job at the Lockman Foundation, which I don't know if anybody knows the Lockman Foundation, but they're basically a foundation that publishes Bibles. Who would have thought? And so he gets his first job. He's getting paid. We get our first apartment. We're 18 years old. We have no idea what we're doing. I bring home our daughter from the hospital. And he's so fully addicted to meth. And I'm like having this hope that I became sober, so he's going to become sober. First week she gets sick. We're back in the hospital. She's, a whole week in the hospital. She has this 102 fever. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with her. She's a newborn baby. We're freaking out. And of course, he doesn't know what to do but to get high. So he goes, he gets high. I'm sitting here alone with my kid in the hospital. At that point, I figured that should have been a wake-up call. Like, this is going to be your life. You need to move on with your life, but I didn't. We kept trying to make it work. And of course, within 6 months, we got kicked out of our first apartment because we didn't have the rent money. I would actually forge his checks signed over to me to cash them so we could pay our rent. But before you know it, that caught up to us. So we lost our first home, we lost our cars, we lost everything that we thought we had gained. He moves back into his mom's house. I moved back into my father's house. He falls heavier into his addiction, but I still have this hope that somehow things are going to work out. So we have our second child. When we have our second child, he's so fully addicted that he's like, this child's not mine. Like, it's not mine, it's not mine, it's not mine. So he asks me to abort my son, and I was not going to. But at the same time, I'm like, he doesn't want to take care of my first one. Why would he want to take care of my second one? He doesn't even believe it's his. And at that point, I was so depressed, so scared. I remember coming here to this church. His parents used to come to this church, Redemption's Hills. I came to church with them, just giving it a shot, a long shot. I come to church and I went into the restroom because I didn't want to I wanted to be here, but I didn't actually want to be a part of the service. So I went to go, I don't know, I guess hide in the restroom. And I was in the restroom and there's this, big painting on the side that has Jeremiah 29:11 on it. For I know the plans that I have for you, right? Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, says the Lord. And so at that moment I knew I couldn't abort my son because God had a plan for his life. If he had allowed for him to be there, he had a plan for his life. And who am I to speak against what God has said? So I didn't abort him, and I had this amazing, beautiful son. He is now 17 years old. He's amazing. He's amazing, and we can go on to that in a minute. But again, I had this hope that this child would be, maybe the reason why. Now he has a son. Maybe he'll see how he never had his father, how he wants to be a father in his life, and It was not that way. I remember having my son, and even the first day in the hospital, he didn't come back for us because he had gone out. And so his parents came and picked us up and took us back from the hospital. And I remember just growing such bitterness and resentment inside of me, but at the same time wanting to fight for a family for my kids. So we have a third child shortly after that. A year after that, had my daughter Callista. So if anybody doesn't know what the word Callista means, it's the Greek word for most beautiful. And she truly has also lived up to her name, and she's amazing. She's now 16 years old. And in trying to hold on to our family, we actually struggled a lot. We lived in his mom's house. It was a house that was full of, people, and she was just meaning well, right? She was just trying to help out her kids, but we were living there now in one room with our two kids, and it was a lot of fighting, a lot of abuse, because I was trying to hold on to my family, and he was just trying to be a kid, trying to live his life, not knowing how to be a father, never really had a father. And I was bitter and I was angry because of my past and my childhood and all the baggage that I brought with me. Did I realize that I was bringing in? And at the same time, I was trying to fight for this family, not knowing how to do that. And just, being crazy, and both of us just consistently doing things that we shouldn't have done in front of our kids. So he was actually heavily involved in gangs. But I was really trying to fight to see if maybe he saw the example that, I was trying to do something well for our kids, that he would want it also. Minor detail that's actually a huge detail that I missed over. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, that's when I became saved. I remember getting baptized when I was pregnant out to here, and I was like, yes, double dunk. I'm getting saved, and she's getting saved, and we're both getting baptized, and I didn't know how to walk with the Lord. I just knew that that's what I wanted. I just knew I wanted something different. I just knew that I didn't have anything or anyone, but this person wanted me. And so I chose to want him back. And I wasn't walking as a Christian, but I was saved. And I look back now and I realize that when his scripture says that there is nothing that can separate us from his love, that we will always be in the palm of his hand, I see it now. Because even though I wasn't walking a Christian life, that's exactly what he was doing. He had me in all of that time, and I would come to church here periodically. And I would see things that were good for the kids. So it's I'm going to sign them up. And there was this thing called Play and Praise, which is where I met Kay Chambers and Stephanie Matthews, who are now board members, have come to him. And I remember taking my kids to the park when their kids were little kids, and we all just, shared with me what it seemed like small moments that nobody knew what my life was like behind closed doors, but I wanted what they had. There was peace, there was love, there was joy, and that's what I wanted so desperately for our family. So I would take them there. I remember my kids playing with their kids and praising God with little kids songs and their little instruments, and so strange to where nobody knew that when I went home. I know one of the times my son, I walk into the room and he's playing with a bag of bullets and a bag of weed. And like I said, nobody knows what you go through behind closed doors. And you go to these church services and you go to these things. And if you're really not telling people what you're going through, nobody really knows what life is like. And that's what life was like for us. And it was a consistent all of the time that we were, to where I felt like we were living a double life. So it was easy for me to not walk a full walk with the Lord, because it was I felt like I was being a hypocrite, so why do it? And so that being said, this was before I had my third child, when I would take them to Play and Praise. And still till this day, I remember a song that was My God is so great, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. And now it's a worship song. I don't know if anybody knows it, but it is a worship song. And we sing it at my church, and I cry in tears all the time because I think of where we were and where we are now. And I'm like, God, you are so strong and mighty. There's nothing you can't do, because he did pull us out of all that. And I will get into how he did that. Because it was a choice, right? We had to allow him to do that. But as I'm pregnant with my third child, here one more time, my boyfriend at the time is telling me, that's not my kid, that's not my kid, it's not my kid. And I think partly was because he didn't want to have to make himself responsible for it. And I'm maybe, a month away from being pregnant, from going into labor. So I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm about to turn 23, so I'm 22 years old. I'm 8 months pregnant with my third child. And one of the times that he had gone out, he went out with his brother. His brother came home. He didn't. So I started questioning, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? He wouldn't tell me. And so something inside of me just told me to go outside and look for him. And I went outside. I found him. But I found him with another woman in her car. And I'm pregnant out to here. And instead of him saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry or anything, he tells her, hurry up, start the car, leave. So they take off. And I became so filled with rage that at that moment, if he were to have come back, either he loses his life or my kids lose their mom, because I am going to murder someone. Literally, I'm not joking. It sounds like a joke, but it was truly what I was thinking. And because I didn't want that for my children, I called my dad. It was 2 a.m. I called my dad and I said, you need to come pick me up, because if you don't pick me up, somebody will lose their life. Either he will or I will. Don't ask me any questions, just come pick me up. So he came, he picked me up. I walked out with a trash bag full of our stuff. My dad said, you can't come back to my house. So he takes me to my grandmother's house. My grandmother's house, she's so great and amazing, but she wanted to teach me responsibility. So she told me, you have to figure out what you're going to do. You can't stay here with all these kids. So I did what I logically knew to do. I went to go camp out at the welfare office until I got assistance. And I got emergency assistance. They allowed me hotel vouchers and food stamps and things to get by. So we went to go live in a motel where we used to get high before we had kids. And in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, talk about full circle. And like I said, I'm pregnant out to here. There's people I know there that are getting high because I used to get high with them. And it was so difficult to try to be sober, to be a mom, to be alone, to have these 2 babies that are in a motel room that have no idea what is going on, that I'm pregnant out to here, that I don't want to harm this baby. It was so difficult, but I remember that was the first time that I actually felt peace. It is crazy to say, but it was literally peace in the storm. And I just remember God telling me, keep your eyes on me. Just stay focused on me. Just stay focused on me. And it was the first time I actually felt peace. And my son ended up becoming homesick. He got so sick that he had fevers, and he wasn't actually physically sick, no cough, cold, or anything, but I realized he was homesick. He was just crying the whole time, and he had fevers, and he just wanted to go home. But in my mind, I thought, we have no home. There is nowhere for me to take him. And so I was like, God, you tell me to keep my eyes on you. I don't know what else to do. So I decided to come to church here with Victor's parents one more time. And as I'm walking through the halls here, some lady walks up to me. She said, hey, how are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm doing okay. I said, how are you doing? And she said, oh, I'm doing so great. I'm doing fabulous. I was homeless, but they just started this new ministry called Come to Him Ministries, and they provided me with a home, and I'm living in this apartment. She's telling me all this greatness, and I was like, wait, what? Give me this phone number. I need to talk to somebody. And she said, oh, yeah, sure, I'll give it to you. And she looks up at me, and she said, oh, I thought you were somebody else. I had no idea who she was. She had no idea who I was. She was just talking to a random stranger. she was mistaken, but I know for certain the Lord was not mistaken. And that was a divine appointment. And he knew exactly what I needed. And his word is so true when he told me to keep my eyes focused on him. Like when he tells Peter to focus on him and to walk out on the water, right? And that if he just stayed focused on him, that he'd be able to walk on the water. And that's exactly what happened at that moment. And I remember running back to the motel room and calling James, because that's the phone number she gave me. And I called James, and the next day he met with me there in the motel room, a dirty motel room with these babies, crying around. And he came to meet me where I was at, which spoke volumes to me about God's love. And had a conversation with me, and we talked for about an hour, and he was like, okay, like you're out of here. We're moving you out of here. And I was like, what? He's like, I'm going to take you to go get all your stuff from Martha's house, and you're going to, we're going to move you into. And I was like, Lord Jesus. Mind you, at this point, I was a week overdue. And the whole time that we're in this motel room, I'm supposed to be going into labor at any minute, and I wasn't, and I was in peace, and I had experienced joy because I knew that God was taking care of us. And the next day, sure enough, James took me picking up mattresses and everything by himself. This man by himself single-handedly moved us into this apartment. At the time was a 2-bedroom apartment when I was, like I said, pregnant out to here, a week overdue. I had 2 other babies. My daughter at that time was 3, and my son was 1. And he moved us in. We had furniture, we had groceries, we had a place to live. It was absolutely incredible. I had never ever experienced so much kindness and love at one moment than that moment. It was like I was beside myself. I couldn't actually believe it. And within a week, it took us about a week to get settled in there. And then I go into labor, and I was like, God, you even knew like when I needed to give birth. Like I was so worried I wasn't going to have a place to take my baby home to. And I have this home now to where I could take her to. And it was absolutely incredible. And we moved in there, and I knew that my life had to change. There was no way that I was ever going to go back to any of that. And that was what I had to tell James. Like, yeah, I used to be an addict, but I'm no longer living there. I don't even want to be an addict. I want to get away from that. That is my hope, is that if I just had a place to go, a safe place to go that would save me from all of that, to where I didn't have to be dependent on my boyfriend, on his mom, on anybody, just live in peace with my kids, that I would be okay. And I think that was it, enough for him to know, okay, then we have a place for you to go. And we did, and we moved in there. And because I knew my life had to change, and I had remembered what happened when I was in high school, I was determined that if I was determined to do something different for my kids, that it would happen. And God had told me, if you just stay focused on me, then I will keep you safe. I knew that's all I had to do. Be determined and stay focused on him. And all of these ladies that I didn't even know started bringing me meals when I gave birth to my daughter, and whatever I wanted, like, they just brought to me. What do you feel like eating? And they brought to me, and I was like, these women don't even know me. Like, how could they just be so kind to bring me meals and feed my kids? And I was just like beside myself, not realizing that is Christ's love. And that's what drew me closer to his heart, was that they didn't expect anything in return. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't conditional. It wasn't if I was good enough. It wasn't if I deserved it, if I worked hard enough. It was just there. It was just handed to me. Their kindness, their love, their compassion, their prayers, their meals, their time that they had to spend doing that to me was incredible. And it was like, God, this love, I never want to let go of it. This is what I want in my life forever. This is what I want my kids to be able to experience, this unconditional love, that no matter what I've done and no matter what I've said, like, you're here and you send people to love on other people. That's what I want my kids to know, growing up knowing. And so I made a commitment to raise my kids in the ways of the Lord. And I just fell so deeply in love with him because of the way that he had sent people to love on us. And it truly was my saving grace. And so it's what strengthened me in the middle of the night when my baby was crying and I had 2 other babies and we were alone. It's what kept me going with endurance. Because I knew I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know how. And so I just went out on a limb and I enrolled myself in school, and I started applying for jobs. And his word is so true when it says to seek my kingdom and my righteousness above all else, and all of these things will be added on to you. And that's exactly what happened. I just fell so deeply in love with him that I just kept seeking him. And in everything that I did, it just seemed like everything started lining up. I enrolled myself in school. And because I was in the ministry, Kay was so sweet and helped me find childcare. And I was such a protective mom because I didn't want anything to happen to them that had happened to me, that I was going to daycare in and out, interviewing everybody at the daycare because I wanted to be sure that that was the safest place that they could go. And Kay told me, I know a place where you'll absolutely fall in love with, and I will be perfect for everything that you want. And she took me to a place that's just around the corner from here. It's called Butler Daycare, and it was Linda Butler that ran the daycare, and Kay knew that that's where my kids needed to be. And it was a woman that honored and loved the Lord, that had structure, that had stability, that had ways that the kids would be protected if anything were to happen, that had I had this whole checklist of things that I wanted to make sure that my kids got that I didn't have. And she met every single one of the things on the checklist. But there was a waiting list. And I shared my story with her, and she said, you know what, I don't care. I don't care what we have to do. I'm opening the door to you and your 3 children. And I had this newborn baby and these 2 other kids, and it was the best place my kids could be. She cared so well for them that till this day we still have contact with her. And she's just such a great, amazing lady. So her and now the mother, their grandmother, were helping me raise my kids, and I was going to school full time. And as I was going to school full time, it was great. I was going to school full time, but our finances were not enough. I was living on food stamps. Welfare was not enough to do everything that I needed to do to get to school, to take care of my kids. And I wasn't at school to pay for daycare. There's so many things that you want to do to be a successful mom, but if you don't have the resources, you really just find yourself in the same vicious cycle because you just fall back to what you know. But I was determined to find a way, and I just started looking for all kinds of resources that would be able to help me. And I found a program that would pay for my school, pay for my supplies, pay for my childcare, pay for my gas. And so that's what I did. And there was certain requirements, and I didn't care. I did whatever I had to do to make sure that all of that was going to be taken care of in place for my kids. I went to school full time, and as I was at school full time and all of that was taken care of, I started applying for grants, and I started applying for scholarships and financially, all these things that I was finding out about, and I started increasing in our resources. But I wanted a job, and I wanted to do something, to not just be getting free money, to do something. And through financial aid, I applied to our work study program, and I remember crying to my counselor in there, I need more. I just need more. I don't know. I'm willing to do anything. I just need more, and I need a job so bad. And he said, wait right here. And he went to go talk to somebody next door that was the Scholarship Foundation at the time. And he came back in, and he said, can you be here at 7 a.m. tomorrow? I had no idea how I was going to do that because I didn't, with my newborn baby and everything, all the chaos, I did not know. But I said, yes, I will. And I did. And I showed up the next morning at 7 a.m. But I didn't have anybody to stay with the baby at 7 a.m. Because even the daycare wasn't open at that time yet. So I remember showing up to my interview with my baby. And I hid her under the table in the conference room where they had us. And I went through my whole interview, And at the end of my interview, I remember her telling me, you know, the only reason why I'm hiring you is that baby under the table, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, God, it's only you. Who takes a baby to an interview and still gets a job? Like, only you. And so I ended up working there as a part-time work-study student, and I was going to school full-time. And I was so grateful that I would do absolutely and anything and everything. I was so grateful for the opportunity that I literally busted my tail to do anything I was told and to do it to the max excellence. And even in my schoolwork, I was trying to do the max excellence, but I had this newborn baby and I had my other two kiddos, and it was so hard trying to be a good mom when I've never had a mom before, and trying to go to school full time and trying to work part time. And I would just cry to God, and sometimes I remember crying, like, I can't do this. I just have to give up. I have to stop. It's just way too much for me. I can't. And I remember him telling me, you can. Don't give up. You can. My grace is sufficient for you. And I was like, what does that even mean? But it was. And I didn't give up. And because, you know, I proved myself so grateful of this opportunity, I kept getting more opportunities and more promotions within my job, which means I had to work more, which means I had to leave my kids more. And it was so hard, but I wouldn't take anything back. I remember doing homework together, and I would tell them, okay, it's time to do your homework now. It's time to do mommy's homework. And we would go to the park, and everybody would do their homework together. And while all that was happening, their dad ends up so far in his addiction and so bad into everything that he was doing that he ends up getting 5 years in prison. But even though it was awful, it was great at the same time because it removed him from us and my desire to want to continue to fight for my family. There was nothing to fight for anymore. He was gone, and so I was able to complete school. I received my massage therapy licensing through that, and when I finished it, I finished with a 3.8 GPA, and I thought, I have 3 babies under the age of 5. I have a full-time job. I've gone to school full-time, and I can get a 3.8 GPA. This is not the end. Like, how could I limit myself to this? The reason why I had chosen massage therapy was because I thought, I'm going to make my own hours, and I'm going to be able to be with my babies because I could just make my own hours and do that. And then I thought to myself, but why am I limiting myself to that? If I can do that, why? Yes. I decided to continue to go to school, and so I did, and I received my degree. And like I said, it was so difficult, but so worth it. And it taught my kids to be determined, that your education is so important. And even though they didn't realize that they were doing homework with mommy together, those bonding times, it just made them who they are. And so my kids are incredibly intelligent also, and such great students. It amazes me how amazing they are also in their education. Man, yeah, there's so much I could share about that portion, but I won't. But just to keep the story going, I was able to do that, and I did all that just rushing through everything, right? School, homework, taking my kids to school, and babysitters and work, and just trying to manage everything. And like I said, I have been looking for resources, and so in those resources, I remember also my son just consistently always crying and just being so different from my daughters. And I was like, I don't understand. What am I doing wrong as a mom? And there was so much to juggle that I never had structure in my life. I never had, parents. I didn't know how they did it. So how do I do it? And I remember finding this resource that was in-home therapy. And I just needed somebody to teach me what to do. How do I keep my house in order? How do I do laundry and homework? Like, how do I take care of kids and go to work at the same time? How do I be a good mom and make sure they're doing my homework or my homework's due? And and a lady came in, and she did in-home therapy with us, and she had realized some things I hadn't realized, and she said, I really think that you need to start play therapy with your son. I said, okay. So I started play therapy, and all these things for an average parent, these would be really expensive things, but everything was free to me. All of it were free resources that I had researched, and in this in-home therapy, she started teaching me like how to have structure in my home. She started teaching me about charts and I remember taking a child development class because I didn't want that as a major. My whole life I grew up thinking I want to be a teacher, and then I had my own kids and I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that. So I want to be able to give the kids back when they're done. And so because of that, I went into another field, but I took a child development class because I wanted to be a better mom. I wanted to know what to do. I wanted to know how to care for my kids. I wanted to learn everything that a parent hadn't taught me. And so through all that, I started just learning different ways to care for my kids, and I started seeing structure and stability, but my son was still so different, and there was something about him that just had such more need than my daughters did. And so I took him to play therapy, and I learned there in play therapy that I didn't even have a bond with my son. I thought, you're pregnant for all this time, you naturally have a bond with your kid, so that, it must be there, and I didn't. I didn't have a bond with him, and I realized I had to start learning that all over again, and they taught me how to do that, and through all that, they were like, I think your son's different, I think you need to get him diagnosed, and I was refusing because I never wanted my kids to be known as a label. I wanted my kids to be kids and be human and not be known for a label, but to know who they are. And so because I had learned everything I learned, I figured I don't need a diagnosis. I'm going to continue. And it was good, and it worked, and we lived through that, and I learned how to grow a bond with my child. I learned to fall in love with my kid. I learned how to play with my kid. I learned how to be a mom. I learned, so many things in this short period of time. It was incredible. And so I kind of felt like I was ready to move out on my own. And so I started looking for a different place to move out of the ministry. And mind you, throughout the time while I was in Come to Him Ministries, there was always a support, which is what made it so great. Not only was I looking for the resources, but Kay and James were always checking up on me, were always checking in with me, see where I was at, encouraging me, coming to Life Recovery. There was always somebody walking with me. I wasn't on my own, and that somebody walking with me truly showed me the value of community, of how God puts people in your life to do life with, to where you don't have to be on your own. It was so beautiful that now looking back, that I felt confident enough to not have to hold anybody's hand anymore, but to be out on my own with my children. And so I don't know, it was just God, because I remember looking for apartments and I was like, this is way too expensive. I don't know how we're going to do this. And I found this place. I remember going to my doctor's appointments, and there was this beautiful neighborhood that I was always go by in the bus. And I thought, God, if I ever had a place to pick to live, I want to live here. And so I went back to that neighborhood, and I looked through that neighborhood, and there was this opening, and I, went in to talk to the manager, and he told me, if you want it, it's yours. And I thought, he doesn't know anything about me. How does he? He said, I don't know. There's just something about you. If you want it, it's yours. And I was like, wow, I'm going to move into a 2-bedroom apartment with my babies where I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And I remember my dad helping us out move, and I remember driving over there and telling him, remind me, when I feel like I don't know how to pay for this apartment, remind me that God gave me this apartment, so He's going to make sure there's a way to pay for it. And I never once in my life missed a payment. Like, God somehow always provided, and the rent would increase, and I would get a promotion, or I would get, some kind of bonus, or I would get, a raise. And it was just amazing the way He kept providing and providing, and His steadfast love in that provision showed me, like, why would I let go of this relationship that's always providing for me, always protecting me, always, and so I continued to raise my kids in the church, and throughout all that, there was peace in our home. There was this structure, there was stability. We had routine. We had all these things that I had wanted for so long. And then our 5-year term came up, and it was Dad's time to come home. And he came home, and it was great and not great. Now, all of a sudden, my kids were going to have their dad, but it was not great because within 2 weeks, everything had just gone right back to where it was before. And so at this point, my youngest daughter was 5. My son was going to be 7 years old, and my eldest daughter was, he came home a few months before her 10th birthday. And so he came home, and sure enough, before long, the addiction started again, the abuse started again, the fighting started again. Everything my kids hadn't seen and hadn't grown up with, they started seeing. And I was allowing it because I went right back into, but it's going to be different this time. But it's going to be different this time. And we lived that for a few years. A couple years, actually, until it got so bad to where I couldn't do it anymore. And I kicked him out, and he went to go live at his mom's house again. And it was so difficult, but it was, I think, what needed to happen at the moment. And we try to do the whole, like, they're with you half of the time, they're with me half of the time. And the kids went back and forth. And, all of the things that kids go through in a divorced home basically started coming up in my kids, the instability, the insecurity, the not knowing of what's next, of what's going to happen now, started rising up again. And we lived that way for a very long time until he had fallen so deep into his addiction. The kids would come home and tell me, Mom, I don't want to go there anymore. Dad's just so mean, and he's so mean to me. Or if he's not mean, he just sleeps the whole time. And I just wanted to protect them from everything that I felt I had built up, right? What God was having me built up. And so I got to the point where I thought, you know what? No more. Like, you're not saying that. This is how we had peace and joy and everything we had when we were seeking the Lord alone. But now you're here and you caused this, so we need to be alone. And I removed them. I took them away from them. They didn't see him. They didn't talk to him. They didn't anything for a whole year. And when I did that, I thought he was going to wake up and say, well, I've lost my kids for 5 years. I don't want to lose them anymore. And it actually turned around and bit me in the butt, because all that happened is he got even deeper into his addiction to where he didn't even seek for them anymore. He didn't look for them. They went this whole year without anything, no support from their dad, nobody looking for them or anything. And so in between all that, if you haven't noticed, I took my eyes off of Jesus and I put my eyes on a man, and hoping that this man would now come and do everything that God had done for us all this time. And so things started falling apart, and we ended up getting evicted out of this place that I had worked so hard for, and moving into a lot of different places. Now my eldest daughter is 14 years old. It's her freshman year going into high school. She ends up going into this school that wasn't our plan to go into because we got evicted, and it was the worst year of her life. She fell into depression so bad that she became suicidal. And at that point, because she had become suicidal, I remember being 14, and I remember threatening somebody with their life. And I thought, if my daughter loses her life, somebody's going to lose their life. There's no way that I'm going to allow on my watch for anything to happen to my daughter. But I kept hearing God tell me, go talk to him. And I was like, no, I'm not going to. We're better off without him. And he kept telling me, go talk to him. Go talk to him. You need to tell him what's going on. You need to forgive. You need to forgive. And I was so stubborn, and I finally just was obedient, because I remember all the ways he had brought us through all along. And I thought, why am I going to turn my back now? Why am I not going to be obedient now, when all these times you have proven yourself so worthy of my obedience? So I did, and I went to go talk to him, and I said things like, I forgive you and so forth, and this is is what's going on in your daughter, but the flesh also came out of me, and I remember telling him, if she loses her life, you're losing yours. And it woke him up. And actually, at the very moment, his flesh came out, and he threatened me with my life back. But I remembered a verse so deep inside of me, and I stared him deep in his eyes, and I told him, greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. I don't fear you. And he just started crying, and it broke him, and it was like, I didn't even know what I had said. I was just like, why is he crying? He had been raised in church. He knew the Lord. I didn't. He had gone to church camp, youth camp, all these things that I didn't know about, but he knew. So when that resonated and it pierced through his spirit, it pierced through bone and marrow, like his word said, he came back to his senses, I guess. The Lord slapped him with that, but it was because it was his doing. It was his orchestrating. He sent me there on his mission because he knew what he was doing. And so he woke up, and he started, seeking after his kids, and he started seeking for me, and he became sober. And I was like, I don't care. Don't look after me. Just look for your kids. Just look for your kids. Just do whatever you need to do for him. And I gave him this long checklist. If you want them back in your life, you're going to do this, and that. And, top of the list was, you're going to seek the Lord, and you're going to become sober. And he started doing everything. And then sure enough, before you know it, the whole list is complete. And I'm like, oh, now I have to do what I said I was going to do. And we're having these visitations and these joint visitations. And I was already into another relationship with another man whom I really thought was going to be like everything. And I thought I was going to marry this man, and he was great. And because I was allowing the father of my kids come into our life and have all this time with them, and I was spending this time with him because I didn't want to leave my kids alone with him, this other man was like, how can you let that happen? I want to meet your kids so bad. I want a life with you. You won't even let me meet them. But this guy's done nothing for you guys, and you're just spending all this time with him. And so he broke my heart, and we ended that relationship. But again, I'm only mentioning it because it was God's plan and it was God's will, even though he was great and he was amazing. And you may think sometimes that things that are great and amazing, if they're not of the Lord, it's not going to happen. And it didn't happen. And I'm sitting here angry because of, now I've ended this relationship, which I thought was the best. And this man gets all his rights with his kids. And in his mind, he's like, I'm working for this stuff. I'm working hard. Like, this is what I want. And at that time, when he was seeking the Lord, he joined this men's group, and God tells him, you need to go after her. You need to seek her. And I was like, I don't know who your God is, but you need to leave me alone, and you need to stay away from me. And he, just kept pursuing me. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, there was this, all churches closed down, and church goes online, and we're watching church online, and I just felt like I was dying inside. Like, I truly felt like my spirit was just dying. And I told him, I can't do this anymore. I can't do church online anymore. And when he went to his men's group, he was talking to them about how I told him that I felt like I was dying. And this guy was like, hey, you know what? My church has been open this whole time. Why don't you guys come to my church? So we go to his church. And it was the best thing that had ever happened to me in my life. And we walk in and we go to service, and we get invited to a young adult service. And I was like, these people are crazy. We're not even young adults. Why are they inviting us? But because it was young adults, we left the kids at home. And just him and I went just to go check out the service to see what it was all about. And we're in worship time, praising and worshiping God, hands in the air, which is a great sign of surrender. But I hadn't realized that at that time. I didn't even know that. I just was for the first time kind of raising my hands and praising God and worshiping him because I was finally in a church and I was so grateful, and he was doing the same thing, standing right next to me. We're not together, we're just co-parenting, and I remember God showing me something, and I was like, wow, God. Mind you, my kids were at home. I see my son in front of the drummer's booth, on his knees in front of the altar with his hands in the air, praising God, and I'm like, God, what do I have to do to get that? Because at this point, my son had been so jaded with everything that had happened in that time, from his dad coming home from prison to then, that he was like, you know what, don't even talk to me about God anymore. That stuff is fake. Don't take me to church. Don't talk to me about him. I hate God. don't take me there. So when I saw that vision, I was like, God, what do I have to do to get that? I'll do anything, Lord, I'll do anything. And I remember him telling me, restore your family. And I was like, hold up, what? And he repeats to me to restore my family. And I know that there is nothing that I have to do for the Lord to work, right? He could do whatever he wants to do, but that there was a prompting from the Spirit to ask him, what do you want me to do? His response is to restore my family. And I look over at this guy and I'm like, do you not know what he's done to me? Do you not know what I've been through? Why would I ever do that? And again, the Lord responds to me and he tells me to restore my family. And I'm like, oh, what does that look like? And he speaks marriage to me and I just want to cry. Like, no. But again, so many times in my life, out of the obedience that I have given the Lord, he has proven himself worthy of that obedience, and that his word is true and he is faithful, that he's not a man, that he's not lying to me, that he is God, and that whatever he says will come to be. And so I was like, fine. I don't know what's going to happen right now. I don't even know how this is going to work. But so we leave service and I tell my husband, who was not my husband at the time, I tell him as we're leaving church, I said, hey, something happened. I have to share something with you, and it's really crazy. And he told me, oh, cool, because I have something to share with you, too. And I said, okay, well, actually, maybe you should wait because mine is really crazy. So, and he's like, okay, cool. And I was like, actually, it's so crazy. Maybe you just share yours first. And he was like, okay, all right. So I'll share with you. And he tells me word for word every single thing that the Lord had just shown me, down to what my son was wearing, the color of his shirt, the color of his shoes, jeans, everything, how he saw my son standing in front of the drummer's booth in full surrender to the Lord. I was like, what? I just automatically started crying, and I said, that's exactly what I had to tell you. We both started crying. And he said, why are you crying? Is it because you have to marry me, or because you're so happy? And I said, both. So long story short, in that 6 months later, we got married. And it's been the craziest journey that you could ever think about, because if you think of all the abuse that was there before, all of the drug abuse, the addiction, the everything that comes with the addiction, the betrayal, just everything that had happened, and the cheating and all of that, you would think that how could this possibly ever be a success story? And we have seen God, what God showed us in that vision. I literally have pictures of. I've seen it come to happen, and all three of my kids serve in our church now, and they are just, I'm not going to say life is perfect, but God has truly been faithful to his word. And my eldest daughter now is going to start her junior year at Biola, completely debt-free, which is just absolutely amazing to me, to where I'm like, really? We went from this little girl who's witnessed abuse and addiction and all of that to she is, on the dean's list every semester, fully paid for the most part tuition, and it's $40,000 a year, and you provide that, and you do it for a little girl that's been where she's been to where she's at now. God, she's not just going to any university, she's going to university where your name is honored and praised and worshiped. And I'm like, how can you be so good to me after where I was in that chair pregnant with her, used my whole first 5 months of her pregnancy, and see her be there is oh my God, only you. And I see my son, and he hasn't even graduated high school, and he's taking engineering classes at Rio Hondo College, and I'm like, God, only you. And I see my youngest daughter, and she is absolutely incredible and loves the Lord, and she's leading worship in our youth worship team at church, and she's Absolutely amazing. She's an incredible student. I see that and I'm like, okay, I grew up in addiction. I grew up in a broken home. I grew up being abused. And I became all of those things. My kids grew up in that and they did not become all of those things. And he broke all the generational curses off of our life. And he's just brought this like unity in my home that is unexplainable but undeniable. And it is absolutely incredible to see. And that is what I am walking in right now. So, yeah, I don't know what else to share besides the fact that God is so good and that his hand was in absolutely all of that and still is. And I know it was only through him that all of this was able to happen. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your story.
You're welcome.